The call came at 11:47 p.m., right as I was finishing my charting notes from the ICU. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer. But something old made me pick up. Maybe exhaustion, maybe just the reflex of a nurse who's been trained to never ignore a ringing phone. Silence on the other end. Then breathing. I hung up and stared at my screen for a long moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Down the hall, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. I told myself it was a wrong number. I told myself that a lot of things lately. I'd been at Mercy General for 3 years. Night shifts, mostly. 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. I liked the quiet that came after midnight, when the building settled and you could actually hear your own thoughts between the rounds. Room 4, Room 7. Check the drip rate on 12. The work made sense to me in a way that most things didn't anymore. 6 months ago, I had filed a formal complaint against Dr. Marcus Webb. I want to be careful about how I say this, because people always want to know why it took so long, why I didn't say something sooner, why I stayed quiet through 2 years of comments that made my skin crawl and documentation that mysteriously went missing, and a man who smiled at me differently depending on who was in the room. The truth is, I was afraid. Not of him, exactly. I was afraid of not being believed. I was afraid of being the nurse who caused problems. I was afraid of the version of this story where I ended up the villain. But he made an error, a bad one. A patient error that I caught and documented and couldn't undocument. And after that, there was no version of staying quiet that felt like survival either, so I filed. The hospital investigated. Marcus lost his privileges. His contract wasn't renewed. He sent me a text the night he found out. Just one. "You should have stayed in your lane, Maya." I showed it to HR. They told me to keep records. I applied for a restraining order 2 weeks later, after he started calling from different numbers. The judge granted it. My attorney said it would help. What she didn't say, and what I already knew from too many patient intake forms, was that a restraining order is a piece of paper. It tells you what someone isn't allowed to do. It doesn't stop them from doing it. The night I'm talking about was a Tuesday in January. Chicago in January is a specific kind of miserable. The cold doesn't just touch you. It gets inside you. I'd parked in the staff garage like always, swiped in through the side entrance, grabbed coffee from the break room before it turned to mud. My charge nurse, Diane, gave me the rundown at handoff. 2 post-surgical patients stable, 1 new admit in room 6 who was going to be a handful, and a private patient in room 11 who'd been brought in late that afternoon. "Who's in 11?" I asked. Diane glanced toward the closed door. "His guys didn't give us much. GSW to the upper thigh, treated at scene before transport. He's still lost some blood, but he'll keep." She lowered her voice. "The men with him. There are 4 of them in the waiting area. Don't ask questions you don't need answers to." I'd been a nurse long enough to understand what she meant. I handled my other patients first. The new admit in room 6 was a 72-year-old man named Gerald, who had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. I changed his IV line and let him talk about his daughter's divorce and the price of gas and something that had happened on a talk show that afternoon. I was good at listening. It was something people always said about me. Maya actually listens. I used to think that was just a personality trait. Now I understood it was also armor. Around 1 in the morning, I knocked on the door of room 11. "Come in." The man in the bed wasn't what I expected, though I couldn't have told you exactly what I had expected. He was maybe mid-40s, dark hair going silver at the temples. Built like someone who hadn't spent his life behind a desk. His left arm had tattoos from the wrist up, disappearing under the hospital gown. His eyes were the kind of gray that didn't look washed out. They looked deliberate, like the color had been chosen. He watched me cross the room the way people watch things when they're used to watching. "I'm Maya," I said. "I'll be your nurse tonight, Nikolai," he said, not Mr. Vasilyev. Just the first name, offered flat and simple, like it was all the introduction he had time for. I checked his vitals. Everything was holding. The wound had been packed and dressed before arrival. Whoever had treated him initially knew what they were doing. I noted his blood pressure, lower than I'd like but trending up, and adjusted the fluid rate. "Are you in any pain?" I asked. Nothing I haven't had before. I looked up from the chart. That's not actually an answer to my question. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite smile. 4, he said. Out of 10. I can get you something for that. I'd rather keep my head clear. I noted it and moved on. It was when I was checking the secondary line that I noticed the way his jaw tightened every time I moved near his right side, the uninjured side which didn't track. I set down the chart. Can I see your right arm for a moment? He looked at me steadily. Then he shifted and held it out. There was bruising along the forearm, deep, patterned, not from a fall. The intake form says the only injury was the gunshot wound, I said. The intake form is what my men told your colleagues. I didn't say anything. I documented what I saw, took photographs for the chart per protocol, and moved on. It wasn't my job to untangle whatever had happened to him before he arrived in my unit. My job was to make sure he was alive and healing. Before I left the room, he said, "You didn't ask." I turned. Ask what? What happened? Most people ask. Most people aren't your nurse, I said. What happened to you before tonight is your business. What happens to you in this unit is mine. He studied me for a moment. Okay, Maya, he said. I went back to my station. He was there for 4 nights. I don't know exactly when I started looking forward to room 11. It wasn't attraction, not at first. Or maybe it was, but not the kind that announces itself. It was more like the feeling of a room where the temperature is right. You don't notice it until you step outside. He asked for very little. He never complained. He slept lightly and was always awake when I came in, no matter how quiet I tried to be. On the second night, he asked what I was reading. I'd left my paperback on the station counter. And when I told him, he said he'd read it years ago, in a different language, and that he thought the translation probably missed the point. What was the point? I asked. That the people who survive aren't the strongest ones, he said. They're the ones who understood what they were surviving for. I wrote that down when I got home that morning. I don't know why, it just felt like something I needed to hold on to. On the 3rd night, one of the men from the waiting area came to find me. He was large and quiet, and introduced himself only as Dmitri. Mr. Vasilyev would like to know if you've eaten, he said. I stared at him. I'm sorry? He noticed you haven't taken a break. He had food brought. A pause. He said you're allowed to say no. I should have said no. I know that. But it was 3 a.m., and I hadn't eaten since 5 in the afternoon, and there was a container of chicken soup on the nurse's station counter that smelled like something a real person had made in a real kitchen. I said yes. I ate standing up at the counter. Nikolai's door was open. We didn't speak, but I could see him in there, reading something on a tablet, and I think we both knew we were aware of each other. It was a strange kind of companionship. The particular intimacy of the overnight hours, when all the ordinary social rules go a little soft. On the 4th night, he was discharged. Dmitri handed me an envelope before they left. Inside was a card, Heavy stock, just a phone number and 2 words. Thank you. I put it in my locker and didn't look at it again for 11 days. The calls started getting worse in February, not just hang-ups anymore. Sometimes a voice. I know your schedule, Maya. Once, a photo texted from an unknown number. My car, in the staff garage, taken from a close distance. I reported every incident. The detective assigned to my case was kind and honest. They were watching. They were building a file. But until Marcus made a direct physical move, there was a limit to what they could do preemptively. I changed my parking spot. I started leaving with Diane, or whoever else was on, until I could get to my car. I downloaded one of those apps that shares your location with a trusted contact. My younger sister in Phoenix got an alert every time I moved. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I had systems. I was at the pharmacy counter on a Thursday afternoon, picking up a prescription. Nothing serious, just the migraine medication I'd been on for 2 years. When I felt it, that particular sensation of being watched. Not the general city feeling of bodies moving around you. Something pointed. I looked up. Marcus was standing at the end of the aisle. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. Watching me with an expression I can only describe as satisfied, the way someone looks when they've found what they were looking for. He was in street clothes. He looked normal. He looked like he could explain away every second of being there if anyone asked. My hands went cold. I kept my face neutral. I'd learned how to do that, in rooms with difficult patients and difficult doctors. And I turned back to the counter and finished my transaction and walked out of the store at a normal pace, even though every instinct I had was screaming. I I sat in my car with the doors locked and my hands shaking on the steering wheel and tried to remember how to breathe. I called the detective. I called my sister. I called my attorney. Then I sat there for another minute, and I thought about the card in my locker. I drove back to the hospital. I went to my locker. I took out the card. I didn't call the number. Not that day. I just held it for a while and then I put it back. 2 weeks later, Marcus came to the hospital. He came at 2 a.m., which told me he'd done his homework. That was shift low point. Fewest staff in the corridors. Quietest on the floor. He dressed like a visitor, badge and all, which meant someone had helped him, or he'd made a copy before losing access. I was coming out of the supply room when I ran into him. The hallway was empty. The supply room door swung shut behind me and I had 1 second, 1 full second, where I just froze, the way prey animals freeze, even the smart ones, even the ones who know better. "I just want to talk," he said. His voice was calm. That was the thing about Marcus that had always scared me more than his anger, how calm he could sound when he was doing something terrible. "You need to leave," I said. "Right now. You ruined my career." Still calm. Still that satisfied look. 2 years. You took 2 years of my life. I think you owe me a conversation. I took a step back. He stepped forward. I'd thought about this moment. I'd actually rehearsed it, the way you practice fire drills. Run through the steps, hit the alarm, don't stop moving. I reached for the call button on my badge. He was faster. He grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave marks, which was calculated. Hard enough that I couldn't pull free, which was the point. His grip was practiced in that specific way. I'd filled out enough intake forms to recognize it. "Let go of me," I said. Loud, clear, the way they teach you. Lower your voice. "Let go, Maya." His voice dropped, which was worse. "Just listen to me," she said to let go. The voice came from the end of the hallway. I hadn't heard anyone come. I didn't know how long he'd been there. Nikolai was standing at the far end of the corridor, still wearing the coat he'd come in from outside, one of his men behind him. He wasn't moving. He didn't have to. There was something in his stillness that was more threatening than any movement would have been. Marcus turned. His grip on my wrist loosened, just slightly, involuntarily. The way a person reacts when something trips their survival instincts before their brain can override it. "This is a private conversation," Marcus said. Nikolai looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, the way he'd looked at me in room 11 when he was taking stock of what he was dealing with. "Are you all right?" he asked me. "No," I said, honestly. For the first time in weeks, completely honestly. He nodded once. He said something quietly to the man beside him. Then he crossed the hallway toward us, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once in his adult life been unsure of what was going to happen next. Marcus let go of my wrist. I don't know exactly what happened in the next few minutes, because Dmitri appeared from somewhere and walked me back to the nurse's station and sat with me while someone, I still don't know who, called security, and then the detective, and then everything became reports and statements and the particular bureaucratic blur that follows a crisis. What I know is that Marcus left the building, and that 2 of Nikolai's people left with him, though not in a way that ever appeared in any official record, and that Nikolai found me an hour later, when the reports were done and the adrenaline had curdled into exhaustion, sitting in the break room with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. He sat down across from me. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, the way he'd been awake in room 11, quietly present in a way that managed to be a comfort without demanding anything. "You came back," I said finally. "To the hospital. I had a follow-up appointment at 2 a.m. A pause. I heard something I was concerned about. I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He met my eyes. "It means that when someone takes care of you, in the way that you took care of me, you pay attention to what's happening to them." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd spent 6 months learning how to defend myself, how to document, how to alert the right people, how to move through a threat. Nobody had told me what to do when someone just noticed. When someone paid attention, not because they needed something from me, but because they decided I mattered. "I don't need to be protected," I said. Old reflex. I knew it was the wrong thing even as I said it. "I know," he said. "You've been handling this alone for months and you're still standing. That's not what I'm offering." "Then what are you offering?" He thought about it. "Back up," he said. You keep doing what you're doing. I make sure you have better odds. Outside the break room window, the city was still dark. 2 more hours until sunrise. Somewhere down the hall, Gerald from room 6 was probably awake and forming opinions about whatever was on the overnight news. The monitor in room 3 beeped its steady rhythm. I thought about a piece of paper that was supposed to keep me safe and didn't. I thought about cold hands on a pharmacy parking lot and a photograph of my car, and 6 months of being careful and smart and prepared, and still ending up backed against a supply room wall. I looked at the man across from me who had sent soup at 3 a.m. and showed up in a corridor where I needed someone to show up, and I thought about what he'd told me in his hospital room. The ones who survive understand what they're surviving for. Okay, I said. He nodded. That was it. No speech, no conditions, no transaction. We sat in the break room until the sky outside started going gray, the city shifting from night to early morning, in that slow, imperceptible way it always does. So gradual, you can never catch the exact moment it changes. Marcus Webb was arrested 4 days later. The charges included violation of a restraining order, criminal trespass, and, though I didn't learn this until weeks afterward, evidence that had been quietly compiled and delivered to the DA's office by sources my attorney described only as anonymous. My hands didn't shake anymore when I walked to my car. The first time Nikolai took me to dinner, it was a Tuesday, same as the night he'd come in. The restaurant was warm and low-lit, and the kind of quiet that costs money. He ordered for himself in what I was learning to recognize as Ukrainian, and when the server looked at me, he asked what I wanted and waited. I thought about what I'd been surviving for, all those months. What had kept me going to work, filing the reports, taking the photos, keeping the records. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was the belief that it would eventually add up to something, that there would be a version of my life on the other side of this that was worth getting to. I ordered the salmon. I had a glass of wine. I told him about Gerald from room 6 and he laughed. A real one, the kind that changes a person's whole face. And I stored that sound somewhere I would be able to find it later. Marcus had come to the hospital that night, thinking he was taking something from me. He thought he ought to walk into my workplace and make himself the most important thing in the room. He didn't know there was already someone watching. Neither did I. But that's the thing about the moments that change your life. You never see them coming. You're just standing in a corridor, doing your job, trying to survive, and then something shifts, and you're not just surviving anymore. You're somewhere new. And it turns out that's exactly where you were supposed to be.